In 1973, the NBC TV horror series Rod Serling's Night Gallery was canceled at the height of its popularity after only 3 years on the air. I'm Jim Benson, co-author of the book Rod Serling's Night Gallery, an after-hours tour. In this video, I'm going to take you on a guided tour to discover whatever happened to Rod Serling's Night Gallery. When Rod Serling's classic fantasy sci-fi series The Twilight Zone was canceled by CBS in 1964, Rod Serling pitched another concept to ABC: witches, warlocks, and werewolves. Triple W, as it was also known, was a recent paperback anthology that Serling had edited. Creative differences with ABC sank the Triple W idea, so Serling countered with an alternative: Rod Serling's Wax Museum. In a similar manner as The Twilight Zone, Serling would appear on screen as a tour guide in an eerie wax museum, whose haunting figures would serve as a springboard for Serling to set the stage for the horrific tale to follow. Unlike the Triple W concept, the new format would allow Serling to explore a much broader fictional landscape and allow the writer to probe more cerebral tales, including those featuring political and social commentary, in a similar vein as The Twilight Zone. But ABC was wedded to the Triple W concept. Serling stated at the time that he didn't want to be trapped in a trip to the graveyard every week, so neither concept got off the ground or out of the ground. However, a few years later, another series concept created by Serling did get out of the ground: Night Gallery. Also based on a Serling book anthology, The Season to Be Wary, this series concept featured the writer as a host and tour guide of a malevolent museum, introducing paintings that represented stories of the macabre, the eerie, and the oddball. The 1969 TV movie pilot for Night Gallery was greenlit by NBC and featured 3 Serling-penned stories. As a world premiere movie, the pilot was heavily promoted by NBC.
Miss Joan Crawford, Ossie Davis, Richard Kiley, Roddy McDowell, and Barry Sullivan. I'm Rod Serling. I would like to invite you to join me for the telling of 3 stories represented in this gallery by these paintings. Join me for the unveiling at the Night Gallery.
2 of Serling's Season to Be Wary stories were included in the Night Gallery pilot: Eyes, which marked the directorial debut of Steven Spielberg, Escape Route, and a new story, The Cemetery. The Night Gallery pilot proved to be a huge hit and earned Serling a prestigious Edgar Award for his writing. NBC quickly greenlit Rod Serling's Night Gallery to be a limited series as part of their new 4-in-1 concept for the 1970-71 season. For NBC's new and innovative format, Night Gallery would share the Wednesday night 10 p.m. time slot with 3 other series: The Psychiatrist, San Francisco International Airport, and McCloud. Serling was relieved that Night Gallery would air on a limited basis. After 5 years as primary writer and executive producer on The Twilight Zone, Rod Serling was burned out when it came to series television. At the time, the writer joked that if Night Gallery were renewed as a full-time series, he would commit suicide. Unlike The Twilight Zone, Night Gallery included anywhere from 2 to 4 stories within its hour. Such a format made Night Gallery much less consistent than The Twilight Zone, but it also made the show a true short story anthology. For Rod Serling, the first season of Night Gallery was a partial return to the glory days of The Twilight Zone. Serling wrote 11 out of the 14 Night Galleries that aired that season, including several of his own original stories. One of Serling's original tales, They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar, was nominated for an Emmy for Outstanding Drama and was later noted by Serling as a career favorite, the other being Requiem for a Heavyweight. The ratings for the first season of Night Gallery were outstanding, and NBC did the very thing that Serling feared. The network renewed the series for a full season, 22-episode commitment for the 1971-72 season. Rod Serling's ambivalence about returning to series television prompted him to waive creative control over his own series and hand over full-time producing duties to writer-producer Jack Laird. For the most part, Jack Laird creatively deferred to Rod Serling in the show's first season, but such would not be the case for Night Gallery's second season. Jack Laird was a veteran Universal Studios writer and producer and had an impressive resume, having produced the Chrysler Theater in the mid-1960s and the classic medical drama Ben Casey, starring Vince Edwards. But in many respects, Jack Laird creatively differed quite a bit from Rod Serling. And he certainly differed greatly from Serling in terms of his personality, as Night Gallery director of photography Gerald Perry Finnerman described.
If you were honest with Jack, he either liked you or he hated you, basically. That was it. And if he hated you, you were gone. But we got along very well. And I understood him. He was a very sensitive guy who he had some strange quirks about him.
In the early 1970s, Rod Serling was a television superstar with celebrity good looks and a winning, charismatic personality. Conversely, Jack Laird, while a sensitive and creatively passionate man, was a bit of a hermit. He was eccentric and very enigmatic. One creative idea where Serling and Laird did agree was adapting classic 19th and 20th century horror fantasy stories for Night Gallery. Jack Laird was a prolific reader of classic short stories, many of which became classic Night Gallery episodes. The Doll by Algernon Blackwood, Silent Snow, Secret Snow by Conrad Aiken, The Dark Boy by August Derleth, The Caterpillar by Oscar Cook, and 2 H.P. Lovecraft stories, Pickman's Model and Serling's adaptation of Cool Air. But even here, Rod Serling and Jack Laird differed. Laird's decision to faithfully adapt these short stories with little alteration frustrated Serling, as we'll hear in this clip.
Night Gallery's problem, of course, is that the shows don't end, they stop. And I'm not a big fan of that particular show consistently. And I meant that, and that wasn't a phony, humble comment. I think it's not as qualitative consistently as Twilight Zone was. I think they do some interesting things. But I think it's devoid of social commentary by and large. And I like to see shows that have a point of view that say something, about attitudes, about the times.
Academy Award-winning horror director and Night Gallery fan Guillermo del Toro sees this issue a bit differently.
Night Gallery also approximates literature because what Rod Serling did was some of the most precise, terse, almost mathematical exercises in word writing. Fantastic constructions that were pure dramaturgy. They were constructed in the oldest, most classical style of, Act 1, Act 2, conflict, climax. They were completely constructed, whereas Jack Laird seemed to capture, like lighting in a bottle. The endings were the endings of the stories, more or less.
However, one of the biggest creative differences between Serling and Laird was the producer's second season decision to include comedic vignettes and blackout sketches to bridge the more dramatic Night Gallery stories. Everyone on the show hated Laird's comedy shorts, especially the show's creator, Rod Serling.
Since I don't have creative control on the show, this was dictated by the network and by the studio, Universal, who produces it. I never liked those short ones. I don't think they established themselves. Comedy is the most viciously difficult thing to get across anyway. I thought it distorted the thread of what we were trying to do on Gallery. I don't think you can show Edgar Allan Poe and then come back with Flip Wilson for 34 seconds. I just don't think they fit.
As the second season progressed, the studio and the network became increasingly uncomfortable with producer Jack Laird's comedic vignettes. By the second half of the second season, Laird almost entirely dispensed with his sophomoric shorts and cleared the way for some of Night Gallery's best episodes. Serling's Cool Air and Camera Obscura, a Serling favorite, The Messiah on Mott Street, starring Edward G. Robinson, Green Fingers, Lindemann's Catch, Deliveries in the Rear, I'll Never Leave You, Ever, Sins of the Fathers, starring Richard Thomas, and perhaps the finest Night Gallery episode ever produced, the terrifying masterpiece The Caterpillar, starring Joanna Pettit and Lawrence Harvey, which closed Night Gallery's second season. Night Gallery's second season turned out to be the show's very best in every respect. The ratings for that year were rock solid, and despite the show finishing second in its time slot to the ratings powerhouse Mannix, Night Gallery was well on its way to be renewed for another season. However, there was a catch. In fact, there were several catches from which Night Gallery would not be able to extricate itself. First and foremost, there was NBC Vice President in charge of programming, Larry White. Larry White very much disliked Night Gallery's multi-segment format, especially since it frequently caused the show to go over schedule and over budget. So Larry White insisted that Night Gallery be reduced to half an hour and only feature a single story. Even worse, Larry White and his colleague Don Durgan decided to change the show creatively and make Night Gallery more suspenseful, in much the same fashion as NBC's new upcoming horror series, Ghost Story. In May of 1972, Larry White and Don Durgan arranged a meeting with Night Gallery creator Rod Serling. In no uncertain terms, White and Durgan told Serling that there would be no more thoughtful, meaningful dramas such as They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar and The Messiah on Mott Street. No more poetic stories like Silent Snow, Secret Snow. And no more issue-oriented stories like Class of '99. Rod Serling was furious. In an eerie recurrence of his Triple W dust-up with ABC nearly a decade earlier, Serling angrily stated that NBC now wanted Mannix in a cemetery. But having waived creative control, Serling was powerless. So Rod Serling decided to use the power of the press. In June of 1972, the Night Gallery creator vented his anger in newspapers and on TV, excoriating NBC for their creative interference and insisting that NBC find another host and take his name completely off the show. The network refused. The show would continue as Rod Serling's Night Gallery. But Larry White was not happy with Rod Serling airing the network's dirty laundry in public. So another meeting was arranged between White and Serling in July of 1972. Larry White decided to placate Night Gallery's creator by offering Serling the opportunity to write the pilot for NBC's new cop series, The Blue Knight. Serling accepted. However, it turned out to be an empty gesture, as Rod Serling was ultimately forced off the project. At the time, NBC executives decided to transform their network schedule by placing a greater emphasis on long-form programming. During Night Gallery's second season, NBC introduced the NBC Wednesday Mystery Movie, a 90-minute show consisting of 3 rotating crime dramas: Columbo, McCloud, and McMillan and Wife. During the 1971-72 season, Columbo, in particular, became a rating smash. So Larry White decided to move both the Wednesday Mystery Movie to a more commercially lucrative Sunday night at 8:30 p.m. and also Night Gallery to Sunday night at 10 p.m. immediately following the Mystery Movie. But Larry White had another reason for that scheduling move, besides increasing advertising revenue for the network. He ultimately wanted to make his hit long-form 90-minute mystery movie even longer, expanding it to 2 hours. But there was one thing in his way: the now half-hour Rod Serling's Night Gallery. Consequently, as the show began its third season, Night Gallery was preempted for political commercials, expanded 2-hour mystery movies, and overtime football games. Even the premiere of Night Gallery was preempted. The network's passive-aggressive strategy to kill the show worked. In its new half-hour format, Night Gallery became expendable. The ratings plummeted, and Rod Serling's Night Gallery was canceled after 8 weeks and 4 preemptions in November 1972. Night Gallery's remaining episodes were parceled out over the next 7 months, with the final first-run show airing on May 27, 1973. Ironically, the final episode of Night Gallery, which also turned out to be the series' worst episode, Hatred Unto Death, garnered the show's highest rating. It landed in the Nielsen Top 10, number 8 for the week. Night Gallery's abrupt end came as a shock to the show's production crew, who were expecting a full season, as director Jeannot Zwark explains in this postmortem.
It was not really the ratings. The ratings were not that bad, and the show had a very loyal audience. The network did not understand nor like the show, and the studio did not like nor understand the show, and it was a show they couldn't really control. And Jack was brilliant, but his people skills in terms of the studio were limited. Also, I think there were open disagreements between Rod Serling and the network. I remember when they said the show was going to be canceled, there was an uproar from the fans, but the show was canceled, and nobody defended it.
Despite Rod Serling's lack of creative control over Night Gallery, and producer Jack Laird's sometimes questionable production decisions, horror director Guillermo del Toro asserts that Serling and Laird's divergent views actually made Night Gallery a stronger show.
But I think that it is that visceral quality. I think that people, it is perhaps a legend that has too much of a good guy and a bad guy in it. The fact that the legacy of Jack Laird seems to be, in my mind, as important as the legacy of Rod Serling for us that it became so seminal for the success of the series, because it is so different in that sense.
For the stars who worked on Night Gallery at the time, many consider it an honor and an extraordinarily memorable experience, as Joan Van Ark, one of the stars of The Ring with the Red Velvet Ropes, explains.
Because that was a respected, very special show, and it's kind of like TV history. It's justified because it was an iconic, special show that gave actors a wonderful, I don't want to say exercise, but a challenge, and in a way an exercise. And for that, as an actress, I'm very grateful to have ever been a part of it.
Sadly, the events that occurred after the show's cancellation were even more artistically devastating to the show. Night Gallery was short the number of episodes for syndication, so the decision was made to butcher the existing one-hour episodes, slicing and dicing the series into an incoherent mess to fulfill the requisite amount of half-hour episodes to create a viable syndication product. The syndication fiasco sealed Night Gallery's fate and its reputation for generations to come. But for the artists who worked on Rod Serling's Night Gallery, such as director Jeannot Zwark, the show's trials and tumult were but a distant storm, never quite reaching their artistic shores.
I had more freedom than I've ever had on any television show. In terms of style, there were never any dictates, like you got to do it this way or that way. Whatever we felt was good for the story. So it was wonderful, it was like doing a little movie. I hadn't done that much. I'd only been directing a couple of years, I think, when I came on Night Gallery. I was lucky. I had a knack. It became my home, Night Gallery. And I loved it.
So did we.
If you've enjoyed your journey on the TV Time Machine, please like and subscribe. We look forward to having you again on the TV Time Machine.